Okay. Hello and welcome to Quo China, a podcast organized by the Eastern Europe Study Center. I am Raigardas Boruta, an associate expert for the China Research Program. Relations between the Philippines and China, spanning several centuries, have been predominantly warm and cordial. However, in recent years, both countries have encountered numerous issues resulting in their cooling off, hitting a low point since establishing their diplomatic ties in 1975. Lately, their relations have been dominated by territorial disputes in the South China Sea, or more precisely, the West Philippine Sea, which have escalated since the naval standoff over the Scarborough Shoal in 2012. Since then, new points of contention emerged, including Chinese illegal occupation of islands, unlawful establishment of infrastructure, and incidents of incursions and encroachment within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Bilateral ties took another downturn when the Philippine government filed an arbitration case against China under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea in January 2013, challenging the legality of China's 9-line claim over the contested waters. I think that my short introduction to today's topic reflects just how complicated and multidimensional this topic is. And our guest, who will hopefully guide me through the complex nature of Sino-Philippine relations and South China Sea dispute, is Lucio Blanco Pitlo III, a research fellow at the Asia-Pacific Pathways to Progress Foundation in Philippines and Taiwan fellow and visiting scholar at the National Chengchi University, Department of Diplomacy and Center for Foreign Policy Studies in Taiwan. Thank you for joining us, Lucio.
Thank you. Thank you, Raigardas.
So first of all, I think it would be very good to start with the dynamics of the relationship between China and the Philippines. So can you give us a short historical background? And for me, especially what's most interesting for me is your opinion, when was the golden era of the Sino-Philippine relations?
Well, I'll put it this way. So there are pendulum swings in the Philippine foreign policy, especially in relation with China. For instance, during the Gloria Macapagal Arroyo administration, there was friendlier relations with China. Some describe it as like one of the best times, one of the best periods for Manila-Beijing relations. And then she was succeeded by President Benigno Aquino III, where relations turned sour because of the maritime and territorial disputes. And it was actually one of the low point in the relations. The Philippines filed a case against China in 2013. And then by 2016, there was a decision by the arbitration tribunal, and the award was in favor of the Philippines. And that, of course, injected a lot of uncertainty in the relations until President Duterte, the former administration, came into power. And Rodrigo Duterte tried to make a soft landing, given that he came to power a couple of weeks after the award came out. So he was in a very delicate position, not wanting to antagonize the country's largest trade partner at a very important juncture in his office, just starting in his tenure. So it was considered like a golden age of relations, considering that it came from a difficult patch in the past 6 years under the Aquino III administration. So some describe it as the golden age or the return of spring after a bitter winter in the relations. And so the 6 years of the Duterte administration, there was more friendly exchange between both sides. Of course, the South China Sea remained a challenge, but both sides invested diplomacy and much energy to try to make sure that it doesn't affect overall relations. And then 2022 came, a new administration was sworn into office, Marcos Jr., Ferdinand Marcos Jr., and relations so far is challenging to say the least, because the return of the issue of the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, um, both Duterte and Marcos said that they would not make the disputes front and center of the relations, that it will not be the sum total of relations. But so far, Duterte, of course, with difficulty and much criticism, lived up to it. But Marcos Jr. Is having challenges in trying to contain, trying to prevent this issue from affecting overall, the broader relations between the two sides. And of course, it's still too premature to say, how these relations would proceed in the next 5 years of the Marcos Jr. administration. But on the first year alone, we see the strains in bilateral ties, and the disputes over the waters and the features in the West Philippine Sea is a major factor behind.
And as I understand, so the current administration seems to have a slightly different approach. And what do you think? How can you characterize the Marcos, the current president's China policy? Is does it have any similarities compared to Duterte's policy when it comes to South China Sea's contentions and Philippines' willingness to not to accentuate on this issue? So is there any significant difference to the current government's approach to China?
Well, so far, what we're seeing is that frontline maritime agencies like the Philippine Coast Guard has been very vocal, and they are being given the platform to convey to the public, both to the domestic and international public, issues, concerning, sea incidents in the West Philippine Sea. And to some extent, the foreign ministry is taking a back seat. And of course, I would say that this is quite different from that of the previous Duterte government, where there's much emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy. Uh, a bilateral consultative mechanism was established in 2016. His first year in office, Duterte's first year in office, and that mechanism, the meeting between both sides at the vice ministerial level, they met 6 times. And aside from that, there were also security dialogues, and there was hotline communications. And the Philippine and the Chinese Coast Guard also established some kind of mechanism to try to build confidence. Of course, the sea incidents continue despite best efforts of both sides. But I think there is a greater interest to manage and to prevent incidents, from getting out in the open, and make diplomacy difficult for both sides. So what we're seeing at the present is that there's much energy and attention that the South China Sea issue is getting from the Philippine government, and the level of noise, of course, um, already permeates, not only from the public and security and policy circle, but also in the public sphere. So I think this would not contribute to improving mutual trust between both sides, and it will not contribute to steadying relations.
When it comes to bilateral economic ties, China remains the biggest trading partner for the Philippines. In 2022, the two countries reached almost 88 billion US dollars. What are the current dynamics when it comes to economic ties, especially investment and trade? And is there any changes since the current president took power in Philippines?
Correct. So China remains the Philippines' largest trade partner since 2016. And so all throughout the Duterte administration, there was a marked improvement in tourism, investment, and trade coming in from China. And of course, agricultural exports, is one major sector that benefited a lot. The opening for Philippine agricultural exports, notably tropical fruits from Mindanao. They got greater access to the Chinese market, with durians, becoming the latest fruit to get clearance to enter the Chinese market. And so I think in the previous 6 years, there was much to be said about improved economic ties, and the way that the disputes were handled, I think, contributed to that. And so fast forward to the present, so far there's been no significant adverse impact on economic relations between both sides. But we don't know how sustainable this dynamic is. If the sea disputes will garner much attention, and the toxicity that comes with it, if that will spawn and affect economic relations, then I think there's a tendency that the agriculture would be negatively affected. I would think that because of China had did not do not shy away from economic statecraft, or using sanctions to try to express its displeasure to the policies pursued by other countries, then easily substitutable goods, like bananas or pineapples, that it's not only the Philippines that produces this agricultural exports, so China can source them from other countries. So I think they stand to be adversely affected. They would be put under serious risk if relations turn sour between both sides. But other sectors that China is also in great need in, like electronics, electrical machinery, integrated circuits. These are important to China, so they may not be affected that much. So far, the relations in terms of trade, investment, it's holding. But even with that, there is of course the risk that if the level of noise, the attention and the resources put, on the issue of the South China Sea, if it's getting too much mileage, then I think Chinese tourism to the Philippines will also be affected, and some Chinese investors may not see the country as a bright prospect compared to its neighbors in Southeast Asia. So those are the risks if this disputes will not be managed well by both sides.
So given the close ties between China and the Philippines, and for me as a Lithuanian, it is very interesting to ask about the weaponization of close ties, the weaponization of the economic leverage. And does China weaponize close ties with the Philippines when it comes to economic cooperation? Do you have any instances when heightened tensions, the political tensions, resulted in some very sudden restrictions in trade, or some bans on imports of some goods? Are there any instances of that?
Yes. So these cases of economic statecraft, we are no stranger to this. Back in 2012, when we had the standoff over a feature in the West Philippine Sea known as Scarborough Shoal internationally, or what we in the Philippines called Panatag Shoal or Baho de Masinloc. When there was a standoff, April to May of 2012, um, our banana exports to China was affected, and they were subjected to more stringent sanitary and phytosanitary requirements. But the same batch of bananas actually were able to get into Japan and Korea, which had more stricter requirements in this regard. But so many consider that this was a classic case of China actually using economic tools to punish the Philippines because of this incident in the South China Sea. So at that time, China was just the third largest trade partner of the Philippines, if I'm not mistaken. So fast forward to 2016, up until the present, China has become the country's largest trade partner. So there are more strings, more economic strings, more leverage that China can actually pull if it so desires to make a point to the Philippines. And so there is that concern about growing economic interdependence between both sides, the increasing reliance of the Philippines to the Chinese market. So while expanded trade is always welcome because it would redound benefit to the Philippines, of course, the business community would welcome it. But there is that concern about if we put too much of our eggs in a single basket, then there is the worry that if relations between Manila and Beijing would be affected by one issue or another, notably the South China Sea, then that economic interdependence might be used against the country.
And just a bit earlier, you have mentioned the arbitration case that Philippines filed against China over the South China Sea dispute. And in 2016, the court ruled in favor of the Philippines. And I would like to know, did the ruling had any effect on Chinese activities in South China Sea? And how significant was it for the Philippines to have this ruling in favor of the country?
Well, even before the ruling came out, China already used this legal case as a pretext or as a justification to make changes on the ground, and it did another fait accompli. So even if the case was ongoing, when there is expectation that the parties to the case would behave and would restrain from doing activities that would affect, the area under contention, South China Sea. China, on the contrary, did the opposite. So what they did was to, undertake this massive artificial island building. So they created this great wall of sand in the South China Sea. So uh, so that affected, Philippine position adversely on the South China Sea, because with this, you know, new artificial island bases, China now was able to patrol the South China Sea more. They can sustain more frequent and more longer patrols, and they can interfere in the economic and sovereign activities of the Philippines in its exclusive economic zone and in the resupply mission um, of its outpost in the Spratlys. So even before the result came out, that change on the ground already took place. So when the ruling came out in 2016, the Philippines, of course, protested these activities, and he tried to encourage China to comply with the outcome, the decision of the tribunal. But it was already fait accompli. So it already changed the complexion of the South China Sea in favor of China. They were able to consolidate their hold using the Philippine decision to go to the arbitration case as a reason, as a justification for their action.
So in this particular long-standing dispute between China and Philippines, we can see that recently the U.S. role in this South China Sea problem became much more prominent. So how do you think, how important is the U.S. role in the South China Sea? And could you provide your assessment of how has the security cooperation between Philippines and the U.S. progressed in recent years? Because I think recently we can see that U.S. and Philippines have greatly strengthened their cooperation in many fields. And just on September 4, for the first time, the Philippines and U.S. carried out a joint sail in waters west of Palawan Island. So how do you see the U.S. increased presence, and how does it affect the overall picture when it comes to South China Sea dispute?
Well, of course, U.S. is the country's treaty ally. There's a long alliance relations between both sides. The Philippines is a former colony of the U.S. And after that, there were bases in the Philippines, U.S. bases up until the early 1990s. And when the incident in the Mischief Reef around 95, 94, when China occupied the reef which is within the Philippine Exclusive Economic Zone. That was 94, 95. By 98, 99, they put up more structures in that feature, and that actually generated security concerns on the part of the Philippines. So the year after 99, there was a visiting forces agreement signed between the Philippines and the U.S. that allowed for U.S. troops to go into the Philippines to undertake joint military exercises. In 2014, another agreement was inked between Manila and Washington, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, and this allowed for the pre-positioning of U.S. assets in selected locations in the Philippines. There were agreed 5 sites. There were 5 agreed locations that time. And fast forward to this year, early this year, it was expanded to 9 sites. So there was in 2014 5 locations that were granted to the U.S. They can have military access to these 5 sites across the Philippines. One of which is in Palawan, facing the South China Sea. And this year, that was expanded to 9. So 4 additional sites, one in Palawan again, facing the South China Sea, 3 in northern Luzon facing Taiwan. So I think this is a key milestone in the evolution of Philippine-U.S. Security relations. And of course, there's increasing consultation about the security environment and what needs to be done in order to respond to this fluid environment. And the South China Sea is a major flashpoint that both sides are trying to coordinate with, how they would respond to Chinese activities, including gray zone actions in these contested waters and features. And because the U.S. Is a major security ally of the Philippines, and the Philippines is considered as one of the major non-NATO ally of U.S. So the Philippines is getting support in terms of training, joint exercises, annual, and the tempo and the scale of the exercises, the complexity, the number of activities involved, the number of participants taking part, it's increasing over time. And other third states are also taking part as observers in these exercises. So these are among the developments that are taking place as far as Philippine-U.S. alliance is concerned. We have also seen increasing activities, cooperative security activities between the Philippines and other U.S. allies like Japan and Australia, as well as some European partners like France. So these countries who have increasingly paying attention to the Indo-Pacific, some of them came up with their own Indo-Pacific visions or strategies, like Japan and South Korea. So they're providing support in terms of maritime capacity building for the Philippines. They are taking part in exercises, including joint sails and combined maritime activities in the South China Sea. And so this is try to strengthen the so-called first island chain, the connections not only between the hub and the spoke, not only between U.S. and the Philippines, but also between spoke to spokes. So those are among, I would think, significant milestones in relations between Philippines and the U.S.
Yeah, I think that just recently the South China Sea, the problematic nature of South China Sea reached a new heights when it comes to tensions. And I think that one of the factors might be addressed as the Russia's aggression in Ukraine. And for me, it's very interesting to talk about how what was the first reactions in the Philippines when the news broke out that Russia has invaded the Ukraine, and how has the perception changed over time? And as I said, the Philippines view is particularly interesting for me because as the survey report has shown, Philippines has a very, I would say, different view compared to other ASEAN countries. And it will be very interesting to know how do you see the effects of Ukraine war and how has the perception changed?
Well, yeah. So I remember that when the full-scale attack on Ukraine happened, it was still at the last year of Duterte administration, and President Duterte, of course, is known for cultivating friendly relations with not only with China but also with Russia. And so, surprisingly, he did say that if the U.S. wanted to have access to Philippine locations, if in the event that the war in Ukraine would expand to Asia, and U.S. would need access to Philippine locations, he said he is open to it. And so I think some may have been surprised with this pronouncement, but I guess this is indicative of uh, close Philippine and U.S. Consultations, or the assessment, the appreciation of the evolving security and the risk environment in the Asia Pacific or the Indo Pacific. And of course, this is a product of long-standing alliance between both sides. The fact that there are regular channels for communication and dialogue between the militaries of both sides. So I think that contributed to greater, I would say, support to U.S. Assessment or U.S. view of things, especially on the side of the Philippine security sector. So I think that the support, for U.S. Security initiatives in the region, whether in terms of increasing deterrence, by providing access to certain locations that may help to improve signaling, and at the same time increasing these kinds of combined activities, exercises, and support for maritime capacity building. All of this are seen as steps that are necessary to enhance deterrence, because what happened in Ukraine can happen to the Asia Pacific if some countries would think that they can get away with it, or that the rules of the road, or the maritime order is open for challenge, and that there's not enough counterweight, to provide a balance and to discourage adventurism, or to make certain actors think twice, actually many times, before undertaking disruptive moves, in this theater.
And the last question, I would like to know how big of the impact does the war in Ukraine have on the public in Philippines when it comes to perceptions towards China and Russia in particular? Did it had any significant changes, or the changing perception of China within the public is mainly connected with the changes and tensions in the South China Sea?
Well, of course, the direct impact of the war in Ukraine, was really on the economic. So the increased prices of fuel, food, fertilizers, because both Russia and Ukraine are major producers of grain, and Russia is a major supplier of energy in the world market. So that affected the Philippines. So inflation was high, and of course the country just coming off from a pandemic, 2.5 years, and then you have this inflation brought about by the conflict in Ukraine, far away, but the effect was felt, across the world in this part of Asia. And so I think, of course, the impact in the relations between Philippines and Russia, the before that, the President Duterte tried to warm up to Russia, and tried to discuss areas for cooperation, from energy to space to defense. But of course, the war in Ukraine changed everything. And so there was, before, I remember, a deal to procure Russian helicopters, but that was ditched because of concerns about how U.S. might react to it. So other countries have tried to moderate their acquisitions of Russian arms. So the Russian defense sector is one of the severely affected sectors because of the one of the fallout of this Ukraine, the war in Ukraine. And but in relation with China, I think the issue of the South China Sea will still be the more near and the more prominent issue that would affect bilateral relations, and how Philippine public will view its big neighbor. And so I think this idea of closer China Russia relations has less, I would say, less appeal for the Filipino public. They're more aware of what's going on in the South China Sea than what's going, the developments taking place, following the course of events in the Russia-Ukraine war. And so I think that, the sea incidents, the tensions, and the disputes in the South China Sea, those would help form public opinion, also elite opinion on the Philippines, in so far as to how to relate with China, more than China-Russia, relations or developments taking place in Ukraine.
So unfortunately, the time is running out, and I think there are many, many topics that we can also touch upon. But I would like to thank you, Lucio, for sharing your very interesting and useful insights on these really complicated, but I think more than ever relevant topics. I wish you a great and productive remaining stay in Taiwan, and hope to see you again on our podcast or other EESC events in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Regirdas. More power to your podcast and to your organization.